Hi, Sophia.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good.
So, I guess you've figured out I have a few questions
You've got
for
some
you.
good questions for me, I can tell.
Okay, so just to get started, I've always thought music is a world where people either find themselves or they lose themselves. Which was it for you?
Find yourself or lose yourself. I've got to ask you a defining term. When you say lose yourself, what do you really mean?
Have you fallen into the world of music and never to come back, or have you found something new about yourself in music?
Oh, okay, in that way. Music is, I guess the best way to answer the question is this. Music in my life is really where I live. It's what I mainly entertain myself with. It's what I feed myself. It's what I listen to. It's what I absorb. It's what I love. It's what I enjoy in all sorts of ways. Concert music of all sorts, pop music of all sorts, fun music, choir music. It's basically where I live.
Hmm? So, obviously, you have a very good musical ear. You trained yourself as a musician when you were younger. Do you think that you have a very good musical ear because you love music so much, or do you love music because you have a very good musical ear?
I have a musical ear, a good musical ear, because your great grandfather, my father, was a kind of a person, a great musician himself. But he was the kind of a person who recognized in his two sons that we each had a musical sensibility early. And he recognized early that in my case I had a good musical ear. I could hear accurately, pitch I discerned accurately. Not only pitch but also quality of sound, what melodies could say, what rhythms could say. The rhythm, the musical ear can be defined many ways, and he recognized that my musical ear was very active and very keen early on, so he kept cultivating it. He was a great one to teach you how to listen. He would take us to musical performances of all sorts. I can remember going to, when I was a kid growing up in New York City, to symphony concerts, to choir concerts, good ones, not so good ones, also chamber music concerts, and even unusual chamber music concerts like performances by viola da gamba and other da gamba instruments, and so he taught me to how to listen and how to listen keenly. That tells you that helps develop your ear. So the ear was the ear. If you have an ear, it has to be developed and cultivated musically, mostly in what to listen for, how to listen, the kind of things to perceive in terms of musical performance. So that's where I got it. I got it from my father.
Yeah. So you grew up in New York. It's pretty much the cultural center of America. How did that affect your development as a musician, other than just being surrounded by concerts?
Well, I don't know that just being in New York, we weren't exposed to an awful lot of the New York center as it is, of the musical world. We weren't exposed to it a lot. My father at that time was a student. He had a growing family. His two sons were growing, but he was a student. He was doing his graduate work at Columbia University and starting to teach. And so we didn't have an opportunity, just monetarily, to be able to go to all the wonderful concerts. For instance, I've never been to a live Metropolitan Opera concert, even though I grew up in New York City. But the Metropolitan Opera broadcasts were on the radio every Saturday afternoon in our house, and so we listened to it every week. And just hearing music, he was an inveterate record buyer. He would always watch for. This is during the 30s when it was Depression time, and even though he didn't have any real amount of money at all, he used to spend money, some of his money, on records. He'd find places that had them on sale, and he'd buy a record for a few cents, and symphony records and so forth. And so we listened to I remember hearing my first Budapest String Quartet recordings, Beethoven string quartets performed by the Budapest String Quartet when I was a young kid, because of the records. So we didn't indulge ourselves in what we now know as the great New York place for music. We just, whatever he could afford, we had.
So what did prompt you to start playing the cello, and I understand you played a bit of the violin?
Well, he insisted that I start playing the violin, and I've already told in some other of these interviews about the fact that I had a tear-stained violin because he would not accept anything but perfection. Absolute in pitch, and a good bow, good sound, and the ruler was on my fingers if it wasn't just right. As a little boy, I grew up with a very tear-stained violin. But in my teenage years, when we were upstate New York, I remember that we had he had a cello in the corner that he had in the house for a long time, and so I said, I asked to play it if I could play it, and so I picked it up, and what skills I had in the violin, I quickly started transferring to the cello.
So what drove you to sort of move from instrumental playing to choral music?
I was involved with choral music almost before my feet, when I was sitting in a chair like this, could touch the floor, because babysitters couldn't be afforded. So when it was time for my father to go to a choir rehearsal, his two sons went with him, and we sat, and of course, why should we just sit and fool around with dominoes or something? We sat and sang. So I was singing boy soprano, and then later on boy alto, and later on, when my voice changed, tenor. And so I was singing from the very, very beginning.
Would you say that your father was probably the biggest musical influence?
No question. No question. No question about it. Right. That, and really a huge appetite that I had to listen to a lot of music. I love to listen to music. I still do. I'm having more fun with YouTube than you can imagine.
So if you could, sort of relive your childhood, do you think you'd do it the exact same way? Would you pick up a cello and start learning again?
I have no idea. I have no idea. I really don't know. That's a hard question to answer. I don't think I would do something other than music if I had to do it all over again. But if I would do it differently or exactly the same, I don't know.
So sort of in another direction, do you believe that musicianship and musicality is a gift or a talent, or can it be learned? Is it something that someone's born with, or can it be developed over time?
Musicianship and musicality are two different things. musicality.
accomplishment as a musician in general?
Musicality is that inner sense of musical rightness, of musical sense. That's what musicality is. Musicianship is that skill that you develop in making your musicality express itself in some sort of a performance. If you're given the gift of music, musicality comes with it to one extent or another, to one level or another. And your musicianship is what you have to develop to train yourself to understand what it takes to make the music work.
Well, what about a musical ear like yours? Do you think that can be developed over time, or is it somewhat something that you have to have from a young age?
I think there are probably a lot of people who have more musicality than will allow themselves to admit. Musicality is something that I think an awful lot of people have more of than they know. But a lot of people just don't want to do much with it. There are people that I know of that appreciate listening to good music, and they have an inner sense of good music, but they'd rather be engineers. I remember when I was broadcasting in Minneapolis, had a concert music broadcast every night for several years, and I remember I used to get a lot of letters from people because it was the only classical music broadcast in the city, and it was quite plain that an awful lot of people who did other things loved and had a real musical sense, but they had chosen to do something else to their lives. Because most of us have several things that we can do, and they had chosen to do other things than a life of music. But they still had a good sense of it, and they loved. I often sensed that these people, if you got them together, you could probably make some pretty good music with some of them, either as singers or some other way.
Working with all the artists you've worked with, do you have any particular favorite moments or experiences or stories you'd like to share?
Oh my goodness.
A vast sea of stories. Pick anything.
I think there are many. There are so many. I think it depends. Answering that question depends upon what direction I'd want to take. There's so much music that I hear, choral music that I hear, for instance, that I know that I can teach performers to perform. I remember there's a piece of music by Arvo Pärt that some years ago, 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I heard for the first time, Passio. Another word for passion. And it was about the story of Christ's passion in music drawn from the St. John Gospel. And I remember hearing it and being so moved by it that I felt that I really have to perform that. And it is a piece of music that has four soloist singers, four instrumentalists in a chamber ensemble in various combinations of soprano, alto, tenor, bass, violin, cello, oboe, bassoon, and then interspersed with chorus and organ, and several vocal soloists, other vocal soloists as well, representing different people, like Jesus and so forth. And I remember that when I first heard it, it was on a recording that somebody had given me. First heard it, I decided that I had to do that. And ended up doing a performance of it, which really ended up being very stunning. It was a combination of, we got some wonderful performers together in Houston, and we performed it, and it was very hard training the chorus because they had never heard music like Arvo Pärt's unique music. And I had to teach them how to appreciate it and how to sing it and how to accept in their ears the kind of way that they had to make the musical line go to get the sounds that Arvo Pärt was calling for. And it was very, very gratifying when we got done with that performance. I have a recording of it someplace. And it, I have been a number of times, I've gone and listened to it, and it makes me happy. Very happy. Is that the kind of a thing you're really talking about?
Anything you want
That's
to
one
share.
of them. That's one of them.
You mentioned Houston. What overall drove you to form the Houston Masterwork Chorus?
Well, I don't know how much you know about the story of your grandmother and me.
Probably not as much as you could tell me.
But there was a time when your grandmother and I were heading for divorce. And we ended up changing our mind and deciding to not, and to stick it out and make our lives work. And we sort of had a feeling of celebration about that. And she ended up saying, okay, what would you like to do with the rest of your life that you had never done before, that I could help you get started and maybe do something that you've wanted to do? And I said, well, I've always wanted to have a large choral organization that could do major choral works with orchestra. And she said, well, let's see what we can do. And I said, I'd love to have an oratorio society and direct an oratorio society. So we found a few friends who shared the interest, and we created the Houston Oratorio Society, and we ended up doing that.
How different do you think, like, what are some of the main similarities and differences between that and what you do here in Austin with University Presbyterian Church?
It's a different kind of a choir. It was a choir of amateur voices in the Oratorio Society. It's now called the Houston Masterworks Chorus for a very interesting reason. The Houston Masterworks Chorus is easier for everybody to understand than Oratorio Society. People didn't understand what oratorio meant. We used to get mail for the Houston Oratorical Society. We even got a letter once addressed to the Houston Oreo Society. So we decided to change it to Houston Masterworks Chorus. But the big difference is that was a large amateur chorus that devoted itself to 3 concerts, once in a while 4 concerts a year, of major choral works with orchestra or some instruments, a combination of instruments. What I do now is a church choir, accompanied usually by organ or unaccompanied, sometimes piano, depending upon what the music calls for. And we serve church worship services. Big difference. Those were concerts that we focused on with the Oratorio Society. But now we have to do something every week as part of the weekly worship services of the church where I direct, that you've heard and even participated in.
So out of all of the different musical paths and careers, what made you want to be a teacher?
I didn't want to be a teacher. I wanted to perform music. Teaching, I finally figured out, had to go along with it. Because if you're going to have a church choir and you're going to do some of the things that they really don't know how to do, you got to teach them. So that's the only reason I became, in some sense, a teacher.
Yeah. So do you think that someone should have to teach themselves to have a passion for music, or do you think that it should just be there immediately?
Well, a passion for music is necessary. If you're going to, certainly, if you're going to live your life with it, you better be passionate about it. But that doesn't mean, that's a hard one to answer.
Well, let me put it this way. What do you imagine your life would be like without such a huge involvement in music?
I can't imagine it.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine it. I can't imagine it at all. Music, listening to music even, as well as often performing it, because you always want to share it with other people. And so in the choral business, you always need to teach other people to be able to perform it. But if you're passionate about it, you have to find ways to perform it. And I'm pretty darn passionate about it, and I can't imagine not living with music in my life. As a matter of fact, I used to support as I call it, I supported my bad habit of making music in a part-time way by doing many other things, doing broadcasting, making films, working on soundtracks for films, doing a lot of other things like that, to be able to pay my way, to be able to live while I did some music in my spare time. And it was only in my midlife, in my late 40s, that I decided I had to spend the rest of my life being a musician. I can't afford this spare time business. I'm not going to be a happy man when I'm an old man. And so I decided I had to spend the rest of my life finding a way to make music all the time. So I went back to school, started a doctoral, pursued my doctorate, and ended up directing a large church choir program and music program, and we did a lot of performances as well as week-to-week work. And that environment is where we created the Houston Masterworks Chorus.
Did you think about going back to school for a long time, or was it more of a sudden realization?
It was sort of a sudden realization. By the time I was in my mid-40s, I realized the only way that I could do it was to get my credential, sort of like get my ticket. I had to get my credentials to be able to be allowed to do what I really want to do with the rest of my life. It didn't want to let me go. I finally realized that if I wasn't going to be a musician for the rest of my life, I was going to die inside.
If you could describe, I don't know if you can, if you could describe your lifetime experience with music in one sentence, what do you think that sentence would be?
One sentence?
One sentence. It's a challenge. Okay, 2 sentences.
My life would not have the joy that I have in my life now if I did not have the musical experiences that I have and can see myself having more of in the life that I live now. One sentence.
That's good. Do you think that that everybody sort of has those opportunities to be surrounded by music, or do you sort of went out of your way to surround yourself with fantastic musicians and a musical career? Do you think that everybody has those opportunities?
Music is around all of us all the time. Look at how many people have earbuds in around their heads they're feeding themselves music all the time. Now, I don't know that that music is really feeding them like it feeds me. But music exists everywhere. It's a constant. It's made popular. But I'm not talking about that kind of music. I'm talking about the kind of music that does something to your spirit and heart and head that goes beyond what popular music can do. And I don't know how to, I've never been good at figuring out ways of expressing why I feel one is more important than the other. But I think it is. The music that I pursue, going to symphony concerts, going to chamber music concerts, going to choral concerts, hearing opera, is a whole different experience from going to a concert of a pop star. And I enjoy that too. We have one of the pop music programs that really I enjoy hugely. We have a video of a performance by Chris Botti and several of his friends. I enjoy the heck out of that. But I couldn't live with just that as my only diet, musically.
I understand you recorded a Peter, Paul, and Mary tour once upon a time. How did that affect your understanding of music and pop culture?
Well, it made me appreciate folk music in a way that I never had before, and I realized that in the case of Peter, Paul, and Mary, they were message music performers. They were not just performing music for the sake of performing music. They were carrying a message, and that is for the whole human race to love each other and to serve each other and to help each other. I think that would pretty well summarize what their real message was. They were part of the early protest movement in the 60s, and their music spoke to that a very great deal. It was focused and aimed at serving that kind of a purpose. But it made me appreciate very much the huge amount of heart and head that those three people put together in making their performances really very exciting. I still enjoy listening to Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Do you think all music is written to tell a story, or is some of it just made for our own pleasure? No, any more than a statue or a great painting is intended to send a story. It expresses something of an artist that can't be expressed any other way for that person. And there's a lot of music that I feel is that kind of music. Instrumental music particularly. Vocal music is a different matter, because vocal music has words, and as soon as you put words to it, then there is some sort of a message, whether it's a message to the heart or to the head or to the spirit. It doesn't seem to make much difference. It says something beyond what we call absolute music, instrumental music, that only expresses what sound itself can express. So would you say it's more a question of expression or interpretation? Or in other words, can multiple people hear different things or see different expressions in the same notes?
Everybody hears a piece of music differently. It's interesting to go to a concert with somebody and sit in a concert and come out of the concert and talk about what you have heard and realize that you heard maybe some different things than the other person did, or the other person heard things that I didn't hear, and it touched me in different ways, or it touched them in different ways. I think music affects us all just a little differently. A Beethoven symphony can stir an awful lot of us, but every single one of us react in a different way, I believe.
So speaking of Beethoven, I have a quote from Beethoven. It says, "Music is a higher revelation than all wisdom and philosophy." Just wondering, any comments? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree with it in this sense. People who use words to express themselves and are skilled in expressing themselves, their mental process, their thoughts, their ideas in words, that's a real gift. But I believe there are things that music can express that words cannot express. Because even though you cannot express exactly a verbal idea in music, especially as we call it absolute music, music that does not have words, or does not have a program idea behind it, it still can touch something inside of us and reach something inside of us and get a response from us that words alone cannot get, cannot produce. So, yeah, music is pretty powerful.
Pretty powerful. Do you believe that music with words can also say more than words without music?
Sure, because that's why I practice that art. Sure, I do.
So I have a few more quotes here. This is a poem by Arthur O'Shaughnessy. Arthur O'Shaughnessy. "We are the music makers, we are the dreamers of dreams, wandering by lone sea breakers and sitting by desolate streams. World losers and world forsakers, upon whom the pale moon gleams, yet we are the movers and shakers of the world forever, it seems."
Because music can reach into your spirit, into your heart, in the depths of your soul, and move you to do something that otherwise you would not do. That's why we have national anthems. Some people's national anthems work, some people's don't. The French have one of the best national anthems. It stirs you every time you listen to it. It really does. It's a wonderful national anthem. It can move you. It can move you to do something for France.
So what do you think about, or do you think about your previous generations of musicians and all the lines of musicians that you've come from?
What do you mean, what do I think about it?
You know, you're surrounded by music through your whole life. What do you think about that and how it's affected you?
Well, I think that's part of what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Is that the music in my life has just been part of my life. All sorts of music has been part of my life, and it all moves me. If nothing else, to appreciate the beauty of it, and the passion and the power of the expression of it. I don't know how else to answer that.
I'm going to do a different one. How much of music do you think is inspiration and how much is perspiration?
Well, getting the music to the point where it can be inspiration takes a huge amount of perspiration on the part of the performers, on the part of the creator to begin with. Takes a huge amount of perspiration to prepare it, to make it available in the kind of a way that it can be an inspiration both to the performer, because it has to start there, and to the listener. It takes both. You can't have one without the other.
How much of the perspiration is interpretation of the music? You know, there's a certain amount of certain aspect of the final product that's given to you through the notes and the dynamics, but how much of that do you have to come up with on your own, do you think, to give the message that you want?
Every performer of music, whether you're a conductor or whether you're a violinist or whether you're a solo singer or whether you're a pianist or whatever, you have to be energized by what the music is to begin with. You have to be moved by the music you are performing in order to perform it in the kind of a way that after you do your adequate amount of perspiration, that will also energize and move a listener.
If you perform in a performance that is, a very good performance, but isn't necessarily superb or perfect, how do you, what do you take away from that?
What I take away from it, listening to your question, is it sounds like every Sunday morning when I direct my choir. It never sounds the way I imagine it. It never does.
How would you describe how you imagine it?
Oh, the kind of a performance by the people performing that moves the performer themselves, the performing group, the choir, performs them, moves them first. And because they are moved, and it is done at such a level that everybody who listens to it is also moved, inspired, uplifted, become a better person, however you want to express it.
Have you ever been able to perform in such a way?
Yeah, occasionally. Yeah.
Such as?
Even on some Sunday mornings, it depends upon how well, in my case, the choir can have prepared the piece of music. Usually not the first time they sing it. If they prepare the music well and have time to have lived with it long enough so that they can make the energy that's inside of it come out and move them, then that also will inspire the listener.
What would you say is one of your most uplifting experiences as a performer?
Oh dear.
One of them.
That's a hard one. Music is so ephemeral. You perform it, and once it's performed, Sophia, it's gone. It's past. The experience is gone. The memory of it can live, but it's gone. And it's hard to, at this time in my life, it's hard to remember any one that is an outstanding one. There's been so many. There really have. There have been so many times when a choir I have directed have really done what they do in such a way that I myself am moved by it, inspired by it. And when that happens, I know it's already happened to the choir, and it happens to the people behind me who are listening to it. And it happens a lot. But I can't remember any one specific time. I really can't.
Do you usually find yourself sort of reminiscing in a performance after it's over?
Sometimes a little bit for a short while, but mostly my mind is already on to the next one. It's people who in church are preachers they have a saying about what they have to do. They have to preach something every Sunday morning, right? And they talk about the relentless return of the Sabbath, Sabbath being Sunday, and they talk about it being a relentless return. One's over, and as soon as one is over, the next one's already on its way, and it's not that far away. Well, it's the same way with what I do with the choir. It's over for today, and already we have to make sure that we're prepared for the next one. That's the way my mind works. So as soon as this one is over, my mind is already on the next one. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. How involved would you say you are in the live music scene in Austin?
Hardly. I have my little corner over there in my one little choir loft, and that's sort of my little corner. The days when I have had a lot to do in a community, when I can reach out to lots of venues and people and organizations and so forth, they're long gone. When you're late 80s, at least when I'm in my late 80s, I'm very happy to be able to focus on my one little corner.
Well, when you were outside your little corner, how did that affect your corner? When you were venturing outside of it, how does that affect you?
Well, I've done it so many different ways. When I was younger and directing a church choir in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, that was one place in my life. When I was also broadcasting classical music every night on a radio station, that was another way I was reaching out into the community. I became pretty well known and connected with people in the Minneapolis Symphony and the music world in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. I was also at the same time part of the University of Minnesota Broadcasting Service, which served another part of the community. And so, you know, any time of your life, you're reaching out and connecting with somebody or somebodies in what you do. And I certainly had my opportunities and enjoyed them and had a great social life that went along with it. But at this time of my life, I'm very happy to be able to make a little music and please a few people in the process and make them happy that it's happening.
So when you listen to a piece of music, what do you hear that makes you appreciate it so much?
If it inspires me, if it moves me, if it uplifts me.
What goes through your head when you hear a piece of music that you love?
Well, there's a Beethoven quartet, for instance. Dee da dee ya, dee da dee dee da dum, and that's just the main theme of a Beethoven quartet. And if I hear that and it's performed not only technically well, but the performers seem to communicate, at least in my listening to it, communicate in the kind of way that they understand what's happening in the music, that it says something to them that they want to say to me as a listener. I'm moved by it. And it just opens an inner part of my mind and my being while I'm listening to it that can't happen any other way. That's a great experience. That's a great experience, and I treasure that kind of an experience.
So what are some pieces and symphonies that make you feel that way?
Well, I just mentioned the last Beethoven quartets.
Yeah.
The Opus 130, 131, so forth. All of those late Opus Beethoven quartets are incredibly powerful. They speak very personally to a listener who knows what they're listening to and how to listen to it.
Do you think someone can find the same things if they don't know what to listen for?
Yeah, I do. I believe it is possible, but only under one circumstance, and rarely does the circumstance happen. If you can stop and sit, turn your mind on, and just listen to the music, and not let everything else that's going on in the world be going on while you're in the background, that music is going on. You have to be listening and focused on the listening to that music. You have to let the music come inside of you and say something to you. Only then can something like that happen. But so many, music has taken a terrible, terrible turn in the last few decades. You know about it.
Yeah.
It's background. It's just something that 3 minutes long and it's over with, and it's just background. It has a good, strong, fun beat, fun rhythms, a catchy tune, says something maybe in some passionate expression of words. But it becomes so much music in this day and age is background music, wallpaper, that the music then can't really say something important. It's only when you as a listener and the performer, whether it's recorded by being performed earlier or is live, when the performance is happening, that the listener is truly listening. Only then can something really be transmitted from the music making to the receiver to the listener of the music.
So you mentioned that you favored Beethoven's Lieder quartets. He wasn't necessarily known to create these extravagant melodies necessarily. So what do you really listen for in those specific pieces that really just catch your ear?
Oh boy. Well, there is melody. There is melody, there's rhythm, but in the case of the quartets, and especially the later Beethoven quartets, there is a play, and I do mean play, in the fun sense of the word play. There is play going on between four musicians. Very, very precise, very intelligent play, but play that goes on and sharing back and forth between these musicians. And part of what you listen for is not only what Beethoven did in putting the music, creating the music, but how the performers engage in playing with it and making the pieces of it all come together and work.
Do you hear that more in his later quartets than his earlier ones before he went deaf?
Not more, so it's just different. And what I mean by that is that in the last quartets there is an intensity, a depth of insight, a depth of musical thought that Beethoven drew from. He was totally deaf, which is one of the most incredible things for me to think about when he wrote it. The fact that he could hear it inside. Now, I understand what that means, because I do too. But to be able to write down what he hears, in spite of the fact that he couldn't actually hear it. Yes, he could hear it. He heard it inside his head. You understand that. You hear inside some of the things that you do inside of your head. I do. I can look at a piece of music and I can hear a lot of it by just opening the music and looking at it and letting it move through my head. But it is more in the later quartets because of the interplay and the intensity of the musical ideas compared with his earlier ones. As you probably know, he had 3 periods in his quartet writing. The early period, and then the middle period where he was developing much deeper ideas and techniques, and then the last ones in which he seemed to be expressing such an incredible depth of musical idea, beyond almost anybody that I can imagine. Bartók comes close, but he is often a different space world in such a way that it sometimes gets away from you because of he's in a different world.
So going back to the question, are there any other pieces in particular that you feel the same way about? Not necessarily with those same elements, but in the same sense?
Lots of music. A lot of music, but every one of them in a different way. There is a piece of music by Ernst Bloch. It's for viola and for orchestra. Cello. I've forgotten now. Viola. Cello. But it has just a depth of expression and an inner, almost Jewish passion. You can't hear it without recognizing this is very Jewish. At least I can't. And it is so soulful in what it musically says. And then there is a choral, a major choral work called Sancta Civitas, Holy City, by Vaughan Williams, which really takes some of the texts from the Bible, last book of Revelation, takes some of those texts and creates a narrative out of it in a piece of music that lasts only about 40 minutes. And there is an expansiveness and a complexity, both in the expansiveness of the musical ideas, but complexity in terms of the forces used. Uses a large chorus, a small chorus inside the large chorus, an orchestra, a baritone soloist, and then way back up in the back distant corner of the auditorium or building, wherever it is, a children's chorus, a boys' chorus, with a trumpet and a little small organ. Very complex, a lot of things going on. It is hugely expressive of what that text is talking about. He has drawn a lot of complexity together in such a way that it expresses very complex ideas in a very beautiful and yet simple way to hear. Anybody can hear it and listen to it and hear it well. That moves me. And, it goes on and on. How much time do you have?
So I understand you have performed a few times with a combined choir of you and your dad's. So were there big memories that go with that, or little pieces, or was it just one big blur, do you think?
I don't have many memories of that experience. We didn't do it that much. We didn't combine ourselves that much. I sang in my father's choir quite a lot. And he has come once or twice, very seldom, and as we say, workshopped my choir, and notably one time, and that's really all. We did do. He did put together a small group of singers on a more or less professional basis, skills-wise certainly, in Dallas some of the years when we were still there, and we did make some music together, and it was always a great experience. But my best experiences with my father and choirs was when I was at Kent State University as a student. That's when back in the 1940s, early 1940s, middle 1940s. And he was directing the Kent State University Choir, and I was singing in that choir. That was quite an experience. I remember being very critical of him. I wouldn't dare tell him about it, because you just didn't do that with my father. But I remember having a lot of criticism in my mind at that time, but then also later on a lot of appreciation for a lot of things that even I was criticizing in the way he was doing certain things and so forth. But those are great memories.
So what do you remember of his voice?
Of his voice?
Of his voice when he did.
He had a very beautiful voice. He had a very beautiful singing voice and was an excellent singer. He particularly sang Brahms' Lieder in a very, very personally beautiful way. There is a set of songs, his last things that Brahms wrote, as a matter of fact, in English, 4 serious songs, Sophia Amstutz, that he sang, which was really some of the most beautiful singing I think I've ever heard anywhere that he did. That those memories, they live forever. You don't forget them. Yeah.
What about your mother? How did she play into your appreciation of music?
My mother, that's a very interesting question, and you almost have to know the dynamic between my mother and my father. The dynamic between my mother and father was that my father could do no wrong, and that she would support almost anything that he did. He actually did a lot of things wrong, and to her great hurt, as a matter of fact. But in terms of the things that he did professionally, there's very little that he could do wrong, and she was totally supportive of it. And she was a very fair pianist. Also played the organ quite a bit, and so she often would accompany my father in his choirs, and she would rehearse for years. She was the one who rehearsed, who accompanied all his rehearsals. And those Kent State University days, as a matter of fact, she always went up to the university for the choir rehearsals and played for them.
But your father did sort of have a more critical ear for technique and just music in general, but you seem to have sort of a lighter sense of music. How did that come about?
I have a lighter sense of music than he did? How do you mean that?
How did you develop a slightly less, critical attitude about music?
All right. I think I know where that question is going. I think I know where that question came from. And there's accuracy there. My father, both personally and also musically, tended to be, you know what it is to be a judgmental person.
Mm-hmm.
He had a very strong tendency to be very judgmental. And he was tended to be hypercritical of anybody who wasn't just exactly the way he conceived things ought to be as a musician. And that affected me a lot, both as a musician and as well as a person. But he mellowed, as I guess we all do. He mellowed a lot in his latest years. He really did. And I think I have too. I hope. It is not good being a judgmental person all your life.
Do you think his judgment only negatively affected you?
The kind of judgmentalism that he displayed, yes, it was negative.
So
that doesn't mean he wasn't also very capable of being, in the honest way, critical.
Yeah.
It was rare, however, for him to be critical and positive. It was very easy for him to be critical and negative. And being critical, both in terms of yourself as well as others, in musically, is an important ability to have. But he tended to be very negative in his earlier life, but much more mellow in his later years, last years. And I have to admit that one does get that way. And I'm very glad to say that I had a very bad judgmental streak too, that I think I inherited from him. If by nothing more than just that's what I learned from him. Mm-hmm. And I think I've mellowed a little bit on that score, I hope.
Did your mother also sort of support that in him?
Well, I said a few moments ago that he could do no wrong in her mind. She reflected pretty much whatever he thought. That seemed to be pretty much where she was much of the time.
So in the moments of your life where you were not involved in music, what did that feel like when you said you were running away from it?
Well, there is a truth on the part of a lot of us men, certainly, that we, unless there is the rare time when sons and fathers grow together early in life, where there is good mutual respect. But if there is any kind of difficulty or tension between fathers and sons, there is a strong tendency for sons not to want to have anything to do with whatever the father's life was. My father was a musician. He and I had very strong problems, relationship-wise, in my growing up. He was a tyrant as a father. And so I didn't want to be anything like he was. So I stayed away from music intentionally, even at the same time I loved it. It was a real tension, And so I ended up starting to support myself doing other things than music. Also, I did music. I've never not been a choir director since my 18th year. When I was 18, I was directing my first choir professionally, and in a church, and I've been doing it virtually ever since. Still am, but I resisted it mightily as a career early in my life, and only by the time I got into my middle life did I realize I'm paying a price for this. I need to be a happy man for the rest of my life, because I began to realize that older people either are very sour or are very joyful. And the joyful ones inevitably were doing what they loved to do, what they really were good at, what they really loved. That's what made me decide in my middle years. That's what made me decide. Okay, I need to ignore my difficulties of the past and become a musician. That's why I decided I need to get my credential so that I could spend the rest of my life making music. And that's what I did.
So what can you say about your time directing a megachurch in Georgia? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I did. I had already retired, as I think you know. I had already spent a little over 20 years in Houston, the First Presbyterian Church. And when I went to Atlanta, I was already 71. More than time to retire. And so I was respected. I was asked to come down because the people who hired me knew what I could do and wanted it for themselves for a short period of time. In fact, they tried to get me to stay there permanently. And it was a good time. It was a good time. And it was a good time particularly because I was able to look back on my earlier years of being a choir director and reflect on all my years and realize how I had grown and how I still needed to do things differently to do them better. And I'm talking technically as well as organizational in terms of how I lead the people. So I ended up doing a lot of reflecting and just plain having a great, good, profitable time in helping a church that had been struggling with the music directors for a few years and help them get really reestablished to have a good music program, a good choir program again. And it was a good time, a very good time. It also made it possible that when I came back to Austin after that to be the director where I am now, I had thought even more about those things that I need to do better. And I've learned as I've grown. Each time you move someplace else, you take the best of what you did before and throw away the worst.
Musically, what was it like in Atlanta in comparison to the smaller programs and choirs you worked with?
Are you talking about the choir program that I directed?
Yeah.
Well, it was a big choir. It was really a large choir. It was a very large church. It was the largest Presbyterian church in the country, as a matter of fact. And the choir had several choirs, and the choirs were larger than any church choir that I had directed before. But that doesn't mean they're better. Really doesn't. As a matter of fact, they couldn't do an awful lot of things that I'd already been doing. Skills-wise, they just didn't have it. So I had to help to teach them, but I took them where they were and helped them come along, and we had a good time together, and we loved each other, and we made some pretty good music together, and hired some Atlanta Symphony people, and we did some nice major performances, and had a good time. It was very profitable for them and for me.
So, this is a pretty different question. If you had to look for someone to replace yourself after your next retirement, what attributes would you look for?
Oh, I would just tell whoever wanted to replace me, go out and hire Craig Hella Johnson, and their problems would be solved. Does that answer the question?
Sure. Okay, I have one last quote from Nick Hornby. I love the relationship that anyone has with music, because there's something in us that is beyond the reach of words, something that eludes and defies our best attempts to spit it out. It's the best part of us, probably. Any comments?
That's sort of what I've been trying to say, isn't it?
Yeah?
Huh? Sounds like what I've been trying to say. Yeah, he got it. Whoever he is, he's got it. Yeah.
Any other stories or experiences you want to share? Big things, little things?
No, the only big thing and little thing really to say is that I'm very thankful for the life, very thankful for the life that I've been able to do. I started my serious life in music late.
Do you ever wish you'd started it earlier?
Sure. Many times in the years since I was able to start, which was really on my 50th birthday, that's late. Many times after my 50th birthday, I have thought that, wouldn't it have been a lot better if I could have started, if I could have started, instead of starting at age 50, started at a normal time in my mid or late 20s. And I've often thought of that. But you know, I have to admit, I'm also not one to dwell on the past regretfully. The past is what it is. Can't do a thing about it except learn from it. That's all. And try not to make stupid mistakes anymore. Now, can I ask you a question or two?
Sure.
Has this helped you in your own thinking about music as well as other things?
I would say yes, definitely it
I promise you something. It won't let you go. It will not let you go.
Well, it hasn't
You have to decide what you're going to do with it.
It hasn't this far.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. You have to find a way to deal with it. Yeah, you will. I have no doubt. This has been fun. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure.